This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. Yesterday, I posted this video giving a bit of a preview as to what we're going to be talking about today, and that would be Safiya Noble. I also referenced the latest video that I dropped in the reading room concerning Davos 2024 and what's on the agenda. So if you haven't checked that out, I suggest that perhaps maybe you want to stop and go check that out over there or check it out afterwards, because there are going to be a couple things that I will be referring to that I covered in depth over in the last video. Just a heads up to everyone. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you have been on this journey with me in talking about the political aspect of Meghan and Harry and their relationships to very senior leaders in the Democrat Party. I believe I've been one of the only YouTubers who has been quite vocal about Harry's involvement with our government and undermining our Constitution, which I'm going to keep talking about because all of this is related and why Samantha's case needs to move forward. Harry and Meghan are a part of this censorship industrial complex, and I've raised many videos surrounding what has been going on with Congress and the exposure of the Twitter files and what had been happening to Americans in being censored and suppressed online, whether it be from YouTube to Facebook to Twitter. People were getting kicked off, and we know a thing about that because the exact same thing had been happening to our community during the window of time that this was all going on. And before I continue, I don't want to hear anybody come at me saying that I am MAGA, because it's not about right or left. This is about us versus them. Ask yourself this honest question. Do you want people like this, the Harry and Meghans, who have been gaslighting, race baiting, and lying, be the ones to be telling you how you should live, what you can say, and what you can think? If the situation was reversed and Meghan and Harry were dealing with Republicans, you better believe I would be calling out and talking about those Republicans. But the fact is, they're not. It just so happens to be all Democrats. I can't help that. So put your bias aside and your assumption of what I may be supporting or not supporting, and just look at the facts. All right? Okay, moving on. So about a month ago, Michael Schellenberger was back on Capitol Hill to testify about the CTIL files, which is a part of this censorship industrial complex, in which the whistleblower that came forward alleged that these conversations were happening at the Obama White House as early as 2017. That very same year, in 2017, Prince Harry and Obama got together in the month of September. Here's what they talked about.
But young people, I think, recognize that through the internet and through social media and other tools, they may be able to mobilize themselves to actually get something done. And the question is, can we encourage that process rather than just wave it off as a pipe dream?
Yeah. Well, you managed to get people to use technology to take real action when you were elected, all that time ago. Yeah. Part of me wants to ask how you manage that, but at the same time, I think what I will do is social media. The social media landscape has changed dramatically since then. Issues of trolling, extremism, fake news, and cyberbullying are major social issues. Right. Is there more that you could have done as president to get ahead of some of these issues, do you think?
Well, most of this is happening in the outside of government. And in the United States in particular, we have a very strong First Amendment. I am as a former constitutional lawyer, pretty firm about the merits of free speech. And the question, I think, really has to do with how do we harness this technology in a way that allows a multiplicity of voices, allows a diversity of views, but doesn't lead to a balkanization of our society, but rather continues to promote ways of finding common ground. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure government can legislate that, but what I do believe is that all of us in leadership have to find ways in which we can recreate a common space on the internet, because it used to be in the United States, at least, for example, we had 3 television stations and everybody watched Walter Cronkite or David Brinkley or whoever the chief anchor was, everybody had a common set of facts. And so there might be conservatives and liberals, but people generally could agree on a baseline of reality. One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases.
I would just like to know what you can say to reassure us that this election will not be rigged or stolen.
Well,
a few moments later.
so I want to be honest. It's not as if it's just Republicans who have monkeyed around with elections in the past. Sometimes Democrats have too. You know, whenever people are in power, they have this tendency to try to, tilt things in their direction.
So should we be shocked that in 2023 it was exposed in the Durham report that Obama knew about Clinton's campaign smear against Donald Trump and making up that narrative about Russian collusion? No. Even though they tried to smear Donald Trump, he still won. And that pissed them off even more, to which they then swiftly went into action to put together this censorship industrial complex in order to regulate online to ensure that this mistake didn't happen again. And what we saw was news being suppressed, people speaking out. We saw that they took those powers, the government got involved, and they did everything they possibly could to suppress that Hunter Biden story. And all of that came out last year in the Twitter files. Those files showed that the Election Integrity Partnership, of which had started in September 2020 with Renee DiResta, Alex Stamos, Safiya Noble was also a part of it, was successful. They then moved on to other things like Virality Project, which was looking at how to suppress something that might go viral and get the social media platforms to either demonetize, to pull down, as well as deplatform. And we all know that this was happening because this was happening to our community, in which Samantha Markle and many others had been affected negatively just for voicing their opinion. It was not considered hate, but Meghan and Harry had the connections and were working with the people who were censoring other people for things that they might not have liked, or it didn't align with whatever agenda or ideology that they were going down. This is what we saw. This explains the reason why we never saw any of the sugars being taken down and were allowed to carry out those vile, vicious threats against the royal family, as well as many others. Now, all of this I have covered before in previous videos. Please see the Stand Up for Free Speech playlist that I've set up, talking about everything from the censorship industrial complex to Harry and Meghan's relationships with these various people who are now a part of this lawsuit that's going to the Supreme Court called Missouri versus Biden. Please take a look. It's well worth the watch. In my humble opinion, I think that Safiya Noble should also be added to this Missouri versus Biden lawsuit in participating in the Election Integrity Partnership. And what you're looking at here is Exhibit 19 from the Missouri versus Biden court case, where this is evidence showing that Safiya Noble was in communication with the group that had been a part of this election integrity partnership, where they were censoring Americans' free speech online. She was part of the planning sessions, and let's not forget that she was also a huge contributor to the Aspen Commission of Information Disorder report with Prince Harry. Now, I believe part of the reason why Harry has been so quiet over the last several months is because, one, he's fighting to get his IPP status back, because Aspen Institute has now been included in this lawsuit for violating people's civil rights. And I think he's laying low. But what you're looking at here now is email thread with Safiya Noble in tow, along with Rashad Robinson, who's another one who's a part of this Aspen Institute with Harry, talking about this report that Harry was a part of in putting out that has now been affecting legislation all around the world. So now, what would you say was the start of Meghan Markle's downfall? Some would say that it was the Oprah interview that started it. Others would say that it was Samantha and filing her lawsuit back in March of 2022. I think the actual real start of her downfall when rumors started to swirl about Elon Musk acquiring Twitter, in which on April 4th, he took 9.2% stake in the company. And it had been rumored online that he was planning on buying it. And the reason why I say that is because this was the beginning of her bot army being dismantled, as well as what was going on with the censorship industrial complex. We all witnessed the liberals begin to panic in an uproar about Elon taking over, and all of a sudden now talking about too much power in the hands of one person. What really was happening was witnessing the Democrats start to panic. And subsequently, we saw a few weeks after this was announced that Twitter was going to be acquired. Stanford University holds a panel sponsored by the Obama Foundation to talk about trust and misinformation online. And the keynote speaker was no other than President Obama, in which his core message was regulation has to be a part of the answer to combating online disinformation. So, this event had 3 panel sessions of about 90 minutes each. The first one, they had tackling the trust problem. And it was the question of what is the role of the US government in facilitating consensus and reducing polarization at home? And as you can see, we have Renee DeResta, who by now, if you've been watching my videos, you know who she is and what she has done, and Harry and Meghan's involvement with her. Heather Wong, who was the former White House deputy CTO of the Obama administration. They had a retired lawyer named Benjamin Ginsburg, who was the only Republican on the panel. We had Rashad Robinson, who is another Aspen Institute commissioner with Prince Harry, and we'll get into him later on. And then Larry Diamond, who was a professor at this university. The second session was with Safiya Noble, and the topic that they were tackling was designing for democratic discourse. What is the role for media and tech companies to ensure quality, access, and participation? We're going to spend some time here listening to what Safiya Noble had to say.
What we're talking about are the kinds of values that undergird the lives that we want to live, the way in which we want to engage with each other and our communities. Are those values anchored in civil rights, in human rights, in sovereign rights, or are those anchored in something else? And I think the something else that often goes unnamed, which maybe I'm invited here today to name, them are the values that he did attend to, such as white supremacy or misogyny, sexism, authoritarianism, constricted kinds of value systems that actually foreclose the opportunity for everyone to participate.
This woman seriously can't see past color. And as you can see, it is a racist mindset that has her focused on the white race. What about Black supremacy? Or what about the values that some people like Meghan Markle who have that are all about money? There is a clear bias that this woman has in everything she talks about against white people. And this is what I can't understand as to why this is continuing to be accepted in our society. It's these types of people with this mindset, not because she is Black, but with this mindset that keeps racism alive and why we cannot solve this problem
in the experiment of a multiracial democracy. So to me, this issue of values is always the driving question, because that's what is fundamental to how we structurally organize our societies. And we certainly have to, here we are at Stanford, we're in the epicenter of the place where so many of the visions of the kinds of worlds that we are having to live with and contend with. I think about, Maria, I think about you so often and the things you're contending with there, and how close those problems of authoritarian control are to our neighborhoods right here in the United States. And I think this is one of the things that we often think of is that these are the problems that are out there somewhere else. And I felt that the president really helped us remember that those things were right here in the United States at the Capitol on January 6th. These things are right here in the passage of laws all over the country right now that are limiting and foreclosing our ability to talk about things like a history of racism and oppression.
This thought process is the rot of our society. And what it's doing by introducing this into the schools and making kids hyper focus on the color of their skin as an explanation as to why their current economic situation is the way that it is, I think is extremely detrimental to these kids' mental health. I mean, imagine being now a white kid and made to feel bad that you were born with this color skin and should not expect to have any type of privilege because we need to be equal. I think what this is fundamentally doing is dismantling the progress we have made as a society to see each other for their merit versus the color of their skin. This Marxist ideology is so destructive to the advancement of our children. And what it's doing here is limiting kids early on to say, well, you know what? Doesn't matter if you try, you're never going to get ahead because of the color of your skin. How they're even seeing this as educational and a positive to end racism is beyond me. What I see happening here is racism becoming even more of a problem because you're going to have people, and I'm sure this has already started, start to resent the fact that they have to choose people based on the color of their skin and no longer on how hard they work or their qualifications. I'm appalled by seeing this as a minority female.
I have 5 quick points. I think I want to come back to Maria's call for regulation and laws. And I think for people who don't understand what role law has in your life or in your community, for some of us, for example, I will tell you, my own father went to a segregated school that was massively under-resourced because he went to school pre-Civil Rights Act. That law made a huge difference in the quality of life for his children and the generations. And of course, that law cannot be taken for granted in the attempts to roll it back. So we cannot underestimate how important laws and regulations are. I think it takes us out of the realm of being vulnerable to the whims of people's not well thought out value systems that they may impose indeed upon other people in incredibly oppressive, restrictive ways.
I'm going to pause here for a second. The thing that gets on my nerves about these social justice warriors is that everything that they say is so vague. Like, is she referring to the not so well thought out value systems of people in America, or is she talking about other countries like Russia or China?
So laws are very important because they're protection. We don't have a strong consumer protection model in the United States yet, and I think this is something we need to continue to build on. Obviously, we feel hopeful about Chair Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, but we cannot underestimate the role of the Federal Trade Commission in protecting consumers in the United States.
So Safiya is talking about DEI hire Lena Khan. Here's what she had to say last year when she had to testify at a hearing in Congress.
Madam Chair, we will now move to 5-minute question. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Like other federal agencies, the FTC has a designated agency ethics official known as DAO. On April 18, 2023, you testified before a subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. At the hearing, Chair Rogers asked you, quote, "Are there any instances where you have not followed the DAO's advice?" End quote. You responded no, and you followed up by saying that you, quote, "have consulted with the DAO and taken actions that are consistent with the legal statements that DAO has made," end quote. On June 16, 2023, a Bloomberg journalist published a leaked memoranda written by the FTC's DAO analyzing Chair Khan's ability to sit as a judge in the FTC's review of Meta's acquisition of a company called Within. According to the ethics memoranda, the DAO, quote, recommended you recuse to avoid an appearance of partiality concern pursuant to federal ethics regulations. Do you believe that you were completely honest and forthcoming with Congress when you asked if there were, quote, any instances where you had not followed the DAO's advice, and you answered no? Yes or no?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Okay. In the letter that you sent to this committee yesterday evening, you claim that you received only oral advice from the DAO, but never saw the leaked memo until after you decided not to recuse yourself. First, it is unbelievable to me that you would not ask for written ethics advice on this particular topic. You admit that you have written ethics advice on other topics, but on this topic you claim you did not see the written memo. Instead, you want us to believe that you only received oral advice and not specific oral advice, but only general advice on, quote, understanding the legal framework, end quote. Did DEO give you advice that is different than what was written in the memoranda?
Thanks for the question, Congresswoman. So my work before I joined the commission was focused on assessing the power of large
I
technology
need you to
companies.
answer the question that I asked. The question that I asked was, did you receive different oral advice than what was written in the memoranda from DEO?
So I
Very simple
consulted-
question.
So I consulted with the ethics official. The ethics official, as was noted in the memo that you cited, although I did not receive that memo, noted that the ultimate framework for instances in which somebody has no financial conflicts of interest.
Did she give
no
you different
personal
oral
ties,
advice than what was in the written
the
memoranda?
legal framework
Yes or
is
no?
for the employee to themselves determine whether they should or should not recuse. That
Did
was
she give you
determination-
different advice than what was orally than was in the written memoranda? Yes or no?
Congressman, as was noted in the written memoranda, there was no ethics violation created by my participating
But
in the
you didn't
matter.
follow the DEO's advice, did you? You could have recused at any time, couldn't you?
I followed the determination that there was no ethics
You could have
violation.
recused at any time, couldn't you?
There was no violation under the ethics laws because I have not a penny in financial stock, not a penny in financial
The
interest.
DEO gave you the
relating
advice
these
to
companies.
recuse, and you did not do so, correct?
Congresswoman, as was noted in the memo, as I noted in the
I'm
letter.
going to move on since you're not willing to answer my question. I read your 4-page letter, which was nothing more than an affront to your obligations of honesty, integrity, and candor before this tribunal that is owed by every public servant. And I would reference Part 2635 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which describes your ethics standards. I want to note that the ethics standards are actually higher than one owed by lawyers, which brings me to my next point. Do you expect lawyers at the FTC to follow federal ethics rules?
Of course, everybody at the federal
Do
trade.
you expect lawyers at the FTC to be an active member in good standing of a bar of a U.S. state?
If they're practicing as a lawyer, they need to be in good standing with the relevant bar rules.
I understand that you were admitted to the New York bar on July 16, 2020, but in 2019 and 2020, according to your Senate questionnaire, you held yourself out as counsel for the Democrats on this very committee. You used this title, but you were not licensed to practice law. Counsel is a term reserved for lawyers, licensed lawyers. And in Wyoming, a person who in any manner holds themselves as competent to practice law without a license to do so is guilty of unauthorized practice of law. I believe the law in the District of Columbia where you held yourself out is similar. Do you believe it is appropriate for non-lawyers to claim the title of counsel?
Congressman, when I had the honor to work for this committee, I complied with all of the document requests that the HR folks requested, including documentation about the fact
When
that
I
had
checked
a-
your registration status this morning, I learned that you are not in good standing with the New York bar. Your license is listed as delinquent, which means you have failed to file your biennial registrations, and it means that you have not been paying your bar dues, completing your continuing legal education, and maintaining your law license. I believe it's shown on the screen. It also means you're subject to referral for disciplinary action. I find this situation to be stunning and a reflection on your ethics. With that, I yield back.
A little fun fact for everyone. The Aspen Commission on Information Disorder report that was put out by Prince Harry and the gang was heavily referenced in this report by the FTC surrounding the transparency around Americans' privacy. So no wonder why Safiya is such a champion of the FTC.
In breaking up monopolies, we cannot, I can't underscore enough, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, all of these agencies that could play a very important role in things like breaking up monopolies, stopping algorithmic racist discrimination through predictive analytics in particular. Predictive analytics, I think, are probably one of the most important underlying physics or logics, if you will, of the internet in terms of predicting our ability to be susceptible to different types of advertising.
Now, here is where I feel that Safiya is talking out of both sides of her mouth. Early on, she talks about how important it is to protect the laws and legislations that gets passed. You know, she talks about the Civil Rights Act, and I couldn't agree with her more. It's important that we keep these rights at the forefront. But what she's doing here now in making the suggestion that these government agencies like the FTC should be forced to regulate if, let's say, these platforms create these algorithms that become racist. Quite frankly, the whole point of AI is to learn about whatever it is in the environment. So if you have in the environment taking information from a certain group of people and it's based off of the attributes of the people, I mean, how can you label these algorithms as being racist? To me, I feel like there's a concerted effort to warp the reality of the information that is being spit out in order to drive behaviors that are based off of a value system that maybe not everybody agrees to. And that's okay. And that should be respected. What I don't understand is why don't these people respect that? It's okay if you don't agree that, yes, we should be teaching CRT and forcing it down our children's throats, or seeing that the world is still so oppressive and play victim. Like, we have the choice to either use the platform or not.
Again, a word that gets flattened into content. But, you know, we should tease out content because it can also be propaganda.
But here's the thing. That's the biggest problem that we have at this point that is shaping society and causing the racial divide and the so-called perception of all this racism. Take, for example, the article that she wrote about Meghan Markle. Safiya loses all credibility here because she was involved in participating with creating this false narrative around all these white women who had been attacking Meghan, which was an absolute lie. We all know that this was a coordinated campaign that was created by Meghan in order to paint this false narrative. Even though Twitter came back and confirmed that there was no evidence of a coordinated campaign, and Christopher Boozy's Bot Sentinel report that was pushed out was all fugazi, Safiya still doubled down and pushed out the misinformation, creating this narrative that truly was completely false, all to prove that this Black woman was targeted by these white supremacists who, you know, didn't like her because she married into the royal family. And I think that it's disgusting that these people create this division and unnecessary division and hatred between people just because they need to profit from it. And I think that this should be a lesson. And when this comes out in Samantha's court case, that we truly do put a spotlight on it, because part of the problem that we are seeing with online today is by the manipulation of people like this. And it needs to stop, because they're the ones that are going for pushing for regulation to silence and suppress you so you don't have an opinion, so you can't express yourself, all because their racist and hateful thoughts about your skin color is the problem and should be shut down. I think that it's dangerous, and I'm calling it out, and I can't wait to see it called out in Samantha Markle's case. And I believe that that's going to open the door to the people who were really behind January 6th.
Of course, not being able to own every layer of the stack. I think this is another very incredibly important place where we need to focus in terms of technology reform. You should not be able to own the software layer and the hardware and the infrastructure, the pipes. This is untenable as a true opportunity cost for other kinds of entrants.
And there we have it, folks. Safiya being a good little WEF member in advocating for this fascist economic state in where private company ownership and government control. Here, she's saying, you know what? If you're running a tech company, you shouldn't be allowed to own everything because it's not right. The government needs to be involved in some of that. Safiya is a proud member of the World Economic Forum, and I talked about this in the video that I did over on the reading room, in which they are trying to race to controlling AI by forcing people under this global internet ecosystem platform where every aspect of our life will be controlled and affected. But in order to do that, we need governments to start passing regulation that is forcing people down this path and giving them no choice. Now, as you can see here, this is the wheel of every aspect of your life that's going to be impacted by AI. And when it comes down to privacy and those algorithms, guess whose name is mentioned? Safiya Noble, by injecting the ridiculousness of racism and discrimination when it comes to these algorithms and why transparency is so important around maintaining this to be fair and unbiased. What I think is so manipulative about these people is the fact that they want this governance. They want to break down people's privacy, and they want to know what you're saying, what you're thinking, so they can push whatever they want to sell to you. Or on the flip side, hinder you, whether it be from profiting or from bettering yourself. Oh my God, can you imagine what a nightmare this is going to be? We entertain this nonsense. And let's say, God forbid, Amazon makes a recommendation of a product, and for whatever reason, somebody gets offended. Like, we are living in times where almost anything can be considered racist or offensive. I mean, these people know how to turn something so innocent into something totally uncalled for. And this is what we see with Meghan Markle. She does this all the time. And so do the Sugars. The Sugars are like beyond stupid. Are they going to be fine because somebody felt offended? I mean, is this where we're really going?
When there are fines to the companies for their abuses, and of course, the more laws we have on the books where we can document and hold companies to account around their abuses, those fines should be put back into public restoration. Right now, we do not have any digital civil rights framework. I spend every day of my life anymore working on this because without case law and without legislation, if you are a person like Maria and many others, especially journalists, especially women journalists, around the world who are targeted, if you are harmed by non-consensual pornography or revenge porn or any host of disproportionately damaging things that we know happen to women and communities of color. We have Amnesty International, we have many studies showing us over and over again, Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, about the harms. We need to have recourse. Right now, if you lose your job or your community is harmed or your neighborhood is gentrified, you have no legal recourse.
It's so frustrating listening to these kinds of people because they go off on these tangents that sort of make sense, but they don't really connect together. So I agree. I think that there should be some kind of recourse for things such as revenge porn or, let's say, taking somebody else's identity in those deepfakes. I think there is need to put some type of law around that so people know not to do that because it is harmful. But when you look at how she limits that down to just isolating it to minorities, what happened to the Megxit community was vulgar, vile, and reprehensible. And I think that all those people that were doxing, harassing, and threatening others online should equally face some type of penalty or some type of criminal charge for it. But unfortunately, there's no laws in place. Then she goes off onto this tangent about how, what happens if a community becomes gentrified. She's not really clear about, is AI doing that? Is technology doing that? Like, what's really going on with that? So she like throws that in, but I don't see how that is relevant to managing these platforms and technology. Like, how is it gentrifying a community?
It's just like, oh, that's sad for you. And that is unacceptable. We should not accept those kinds of terms. So the fines and the fees that must be levied against the tech sector need to go back into repair in a meaningful way. And I think this is a huge, again, solution space. I can tell you that Black women in particular in this space around critiquing the harms, because we have seen the harms come to our communities long before movies were made on Netflix, and people dawned upon them after Donald Trump was elected. Many of us have been doing this work, women of color have been doing this work for a very long time, not funded, not supported, and we are in fact the people who are most likely to be harmed.
Do you see how discriminatory this is? Like, why leave out white women? I'm sure they face the same problems that she's talking about as well. You know, why make it a point to separate Black from white? Obviously, these people truly want to keep racism alive. They truly want to keep this hatred and division happening because this is how they make their money. Another problem with these people is, yeah, they talk out of both sides of their mouth when they say, oh, we need to have open dialogue and we need to be receptive. But at the same time, they're the ones who never want to have a debate or discussion on the things that they are saying. Like, for instance,
I want to jump in because I really appreciate this conversation about a shared reality, and I think there can be multiple shared realities simultaneously. You know, even in this convening today, I've been able to have eye contact with several people who I'm using my superpowers not to look at right now, because we might be having a different meta version and experience of today. So, you know, there are the ways in which we conceive of what are we talking about when we talk about reality or non-reality. For me, these things are like, they're too esoteric in this kind of environment, the way we're having these conversations. What we're talking about is, to me, when especially Maria, when I hear, you know, the things that you're talking about and that you're experiencing, the things I heard Rashad talk about on this morning's panel, the things the president talked about, we're talking about, do people want to double down on the promise or the possibility of democracy?
no, to be honest, I don't want this democracy that she's selling because it's hateful and it's extremely biased. And quite frankly, it is divisive. Clearly, we've seen how they have used this as a weapon.
Fully expressed for everyone, where everyone is afforded the kind of basic tenets that we think of when we think of democracy, like a high quality of life, a high standard of living, community, resources, and so forth. And of course,
She truly is talking about communism. I mean, you would like to think that she truly is talking about communism here. And, you know, we should be concerned that there is no mention of freedom. That's what democracy means to me, but the fact she doesn't include that, or even the freedom of choice, should be alarming to all of us.
we are still in the experiment in the United States of extending these alleged promises beyond our own borders. And in fact, many of the things and the affordances that we experience have come at the cost or the expense of other people, other nations around the world. There's no denying that. In fact, in our own country, the largesse and the wealth that has been built on the backs of enslaved labor and occupied lands. So when we talk about things like what is democracy, what is the golden age of democracy, some communities are still trying to experience this alleged promise of democracy. So I don't think there is a golden age, I guess. It's more like, what is the possibility for what's possible for more people? And that is up against other competing value systems like right-wing authoritarianism, rising up of a white ethno-state, implementing apartheid-like laws and legislation in this country.
I think here is where Safiya's blatant racism and ignorance shines through here. She doesn't realize that she is taking people down a very dangerous path with this ideology. And it's not just her, there's many others that have been indoctrinated in this very Marxist, communistic school of thought. This weekend I was having a conversation with my family who, we have immigrated to the United States. I was born here, but my family is not American. And they fled their country because of the communism that took over and the dictatorship. And they are commenting by saying that the things that they're seeing going on here is what was happening to their country and why they had to leave. This should be a wake up call to people in shaking them by saying, look, you need to shut the fuck up, because right now, all those freedoms that your father had with the civil rights will also be taken away if we continue down this very wrong and dangerous path and school of thought. Safiya had the perfect opportunity to address this head on, but she chose to avoid it by making the comment that I'm just going to ignore looking at you because we're not on the same wavelength. Well, when is the right time to have this debate and discussion? Clearly, these people do not want to see any other concept or ideas because they feel that this is the right way to go. And you can't reason with people like this.
So let us not be in here, waxing poetic on things like, realities or unrealities, because those are the kinds of stakes that we are talking about when we're talking about an environment of disinformation. Disinformation disserves us also, because if we're talking about, do we want to live in a society where we can openly call for the murder of elected officials in front of the Capitol? Do we want to live in a society where Black people cannot vote? Do we want to live in a society that incarcerates more of its residents than any other country in the world? These are the real questions to me that are at the heart of what is disinformation. What is, it's.
If you made it this far, I'm sure every one of you are flipping mad after hearing her talk about disinformation when she was a part of the biggest disinformation hate campaign against targeting a group of white people who were threatened, doxxed, impacted financially, and also impacted health-wise from a mental perspective. So, no, don't want to live in a society like that. But when you have people talking out of both sides of their mouth, doing exactly what they're saying that they don't want to see happen, then they should have no business or right to be up on that panel and have a forum to spew out this garbage.
I cannot be in the conversation if the terms of it are not based in reality. And for me, these are the kinds of realities that I'm looking at. So of course, things like even the First Amendment, and Marisha, I love that you really remind us that the First Amendment is not a global concept by any means, and yet it is so foundational to the way that so many of the tech companies operate. So that right on the face of it, we're out of the gate on the wrong foot.
To me, she sounds like she is completely against the First Amendment, especially if the tech companies are rooted and their foundation is based off of that, and she doesn't like that. Clearly, she says we're off on the wrong foot. Then I think someone needs to have a serious conversation as to why is she living here in the United States, and maybe she should pack her bags and go to China.
The other part of the First Amendment to the first question that was asked is freedom of assembly. And one of the things that we know from the brilliant work of people like Marianne Franks, a constitutional law professor, and her recent book, The Cult of the Constitution, is that absolute speech at all costs is also impediment to people's ability to assemble. So there's actually a relationship and a balance between speech and assembly. And we need to actually, if we want to go down the First Amendment path, we actually have to contend with these complexities. And when we don't understand, Americans don't understand why the Europeans are regulating, well, part of it is that regulation is in relationship to concepts of how the world should be organized that Europe is also responding to, as are other countries.
And what do we see happening with these regulations? Are people living for the better? No. Are we getting better as a society? No. Are things getting worse? Yes. So, what is the point you're trying to make, Safiya?
I find it just completely fascinating that at the moment in American history where we have the most expansive conception of democracy, which is on the heels of the civil rights and Black power and Brown power movements, where we have maximal opportunity for voters to participate in electoral politics. We have an impulse to support things like affirmative action, where we open up positions of power and decision-making to women, to people of color who have been systematically excluded for hundreds of years.
This whole thing makes me so infuriated. Like, choose the best person for the job based off of the qualifications. It shouldn't be just about the skin color and their racial ethnicity to fill a position. We're seeing this backfire on a lot of us in many different ways in every industry as far as advancing and innovating, because what's happening is that people are being picked for positions that they're not even qualified for, but only because they have filled the diversity box, they have gotten that position. Where it becomes dangerous is when you hire DEI first, then second qualifications, and you find putting others in safety risks. Like, take, for example, that airline. I'm not sure if it was Delta or if it was American, where they hired someone based off of their racial background versus their qualifications and having the right stuff to fly planes. Now, honestly, if you got a company that's picking race and gender and color over someone who is qualified, that is responsible for your life, I would be seriously considering not going with that company.
That is also the moment that we decide that computers can make better decisions than human beings, and we reconstitute power into a small group of people who emanate from this part of the world. So these are the kinds of things that I think are really crucial to keep at the forefront. Otherwise, we keep coming to disinformation conferences and we're talking about, like, should people get to believe in disinformation or not? Should people get to be influenced by propaganda if they want to? Isn't this just that people want to protect their way of life? Well, we want to remember that the last president of the United States, the way of life that he wanted to hearken back to was a way of life that would have had Rashad and I and my husband and a few other people here not even be able to be in this room.
And that's a flat out lie. And here they are using, again, the fact that they are of mixed race or minority, non-white, to their advantage to manipulate the audience. 100% a lie. Again, she's talking out of both sides of her mouth. She's talking about a small group of people who have power in this tech space. Well, what are you doing with the World Economic Forum? I mean, that's exactly what you're describing. So why are you a part of it? Again, here we are with the hypocrisy and the all over the place trying to sell a narrative that, quite frankly, I don't buy for 1 second. And the fact that this woman has supported Meghan Markle in this false narrative that has created so much harm and division, not only put people's lives in jeopardy and affected their safety, including the royal family, but also have been a part of fueling what has been going on in the discourse that has been happening online. It's mind-blowing that these very same people are making so much money. So let me just share this last point with you. So for Safiya's services, the amount of money that Archwell has given her in 2021 for all this support was $375,000, according to the IRS tax form. I think that too should also be opened and put under investigation. I don't think these people fully understand the damage that they have caused in trying to play the arbiter of truth and controlling information and deciding what people can do and cannot do online. I mean, the ball is in motion with legislations being passed And we right now here in the United States are under threat of our democracy. Well, I don't even like using that word anymore. Our freedoms being taken away as a result of people like this who think you should not have the ability to express yourselves or think a certain way. Let me leave everyone with this. So, in October of 2022, the White House had passed this blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And guess who had input and influence on this? Well, Safiya Noble, for one, and how digital rights and AI rights should be equal and not discriminatory. And they make it a clear point in this document, all throughout it, to not be biased to Black people. And I think that there's something to be said when the core focus now is separating still white and blacks, but now it's the reverse. Black people have more privilege and more rights in this document. It does appear to be favored. And I think it's sad. It's sad that we have been manipulated to this point where we can't just see ourselves as Americans and get past it. And this is one of the parts that Safiya contributed to, or her algorithms of oppression reference is contributed to, in which it says searches for Black girls, Asian girls, or Latina girls returns predominantly sexualized content rather than role models, toys, or activities. Some search engines have been working to reduce the prevalence of these results, but the problem remains. Let me show you what comes up in the search. We do have a problem, but it's definitely not against Black people. Here are the Black girls. I don't see anything wrong, looks respectable. Latina girls, I don't see anything alarming here. For Asians, yeah, it's a bit offensive, but I don't see them screaming at the top of their lungs that this is a problem. And of course, they make no mention of white girls being Googled, and when you do Google it, look what comes up. Quite frankly, if I was a white woman, I would be offended that this is what is supposedly representing, or the stereotype that's representing your race. And quite frankly, I don't think it's okay for us to ignore that and ignore the feelings of white people when it comes up. It's not okay to do this to them. Also, you know who else had influence on this? The Aspen Commission on Information Disorder. You guessed it. Yes, Prince Harry has had his hands in this. I don't know how America feels about this British foreign national on U.S. soil undermining our freedoms and influencing our government. But I think something really needs to be done. At least in 2024, we really need to make a decision on, is this the right administration in our government at this moment to allow this takeover and destruction of our country? I'm just putting that out there. The choice is for you guys to decide, but this is what we have allowed to go on over the last couple of years. And I'll leave it at that. I know that this was a long video, and if you lasted this far, thank you so much for sticking it out. As always, I am so grateful and appreciative. Please don't forget to hit the like button so more people can be aware of this facade and this destruction that we're seeing. But as always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
You're such a fraud.